The financial system and the economic system is on the brink, and the information that you get from the mainstream media is designed to keep you engaged, designed to keep you and maintain the trust that you've extended to them. Frankly, you're misplacing your trust. It's not a question of people could lose everything. I think the vast majority of the middle class will lose everything. What has been set in motion is an inflation or even a hyperinflationary scenario. And in that context, assets that are paper are worthless. They become worth nothing. The financial storms that are theoretically on the horizon aren't theoretical anymore. They're real, they're here. It's the equivalent of having 3 or 4 Category 5 hurricanes converging on one city at one time. Very unfortunate. Financial storm number 1 is what I would call the easy money game. It started at the beginning of the century. 1913 was when the Federal Reserve was created, and the Federal Reserve took the money-creating ability and put it with a private institution, which is remarkable in and of itself. And it's worth reading the Federal Reserve Act if someone wants to understand how it was created and what it's about. But what it was a money machine. The Federal Reserve can create any amount of money it wants. It was created in large response to a crash that occurred in 1907. The stock market came to a halt. Many of your major firms went broke. 1907, Westinghouse, one of the big powerhouses, they couldn't finance their loans. They had a number of loans that were coming due and to maturity, and they had to roll them over, and no one would finance them. It's almost identical to what we have today, only in 1907, and again in the 1930s, when the same thing happened again, there was not enough money in the system to ease the credit crunch. And so the Federal Reserve was created to create an infinite amount of money and then, when need be, contract it back again. The problem is, if you look at a chart of money supply growth from 1913 forward, there's only 2 years following World War II where they've actually decreased the money supply. So they were supposed to expand and contract like an accordion. In fact, what they've done is, I think from 1919, basically the dollar will buy you 2 cents of what it would buy back then. So we've essentially lost 98% of our purchasing power from then to now. What does that really mean? It means that it takes 2 people working to pay bills. It means that to have a standard of living that you enjoy, sometimes you have to put it on a credit card or roll your debt into a home equity loan or include it in your mortgage payments. It means that the middle class is getting squeezed because inflation is basically just a different form of taxation. It's just a silent and very deceptive form of taxation. So what is the easy money game? The easy money game is essentially the federal government being able to create as many dollars as they need. If you took a glass of scotch, very potent, 40 proof or greater, and what you have in that small glass of scotch is substantive. If I take that glass of scotch and I pour it into a bathtub full of water, I still have a glass of scotch, but it's lost its potency. And that is what inflation does to your money system. That is how the middle class is in many regards being impoverished. And frankly, why this is not a partisan issue. This isn't the Republicans versus the Democrats. This is a system that's broken. This is a system that's been broken for a long, long time, based on very bad ideas, very poorly constructed ideas that do in fact work under the right circumstances, but then put under stress, fail miserably. And that's what we have today, is because of an easy money system, a money system that we've become addicted to, we're in a bit of a bind. The consequence for the average guy, if you want to just look at 3 instances of hyperinflation in the last 100 years, you've got Zimbabwe, which is currently in a hyperinflation. You've got Argentina, which was in a hyperinflation during the early part of this decade, 2000, 2001, 2002. If you want to go back a little further, Weimar Germany from 1919 to 1924. And what it meant is that the common man needed to take off his smoke break and his coffee break and his lunch break and get paid, not at the end of the day, not at the end of the week, not bi-weekly, not monthly, but literally multiple times during the day, to go out and spend everything that he made before it was worth even less. If this financial storm hits, and it will, Joe and Susie Lunchbox are going to have nothing. They'll go to their bank account, and if they have $10,000 or $20,000 saved, they'll be able to buy a pack of gum with it, because their currency will be worth nothing. This is a system that was largely engineered by John Maynard Keynes. Keynes was very comfortable with the idea of inflation, and the idea that the average man, the common man on the street, would never understand what was happening, would never understand that he wasn't only paying an income tax, not only paying sales tax, but there was this third and nefarious and hidden tax. Everything he does is worth less and less and less over time. And just when he thinks he's getting ahead, just when he thinks he's saving something for the future, it's actually going to nothing. A 6% rate of inflation on a $10,000 investment at the end of 30 years destroys 85% of the purchasing power of that $10,000. So what's the incentive? You save $10,000. 30 years from now, it's only worth $1,500. So what you do is you encourage an entire society to consume rather than save. They have to consume because it doesn't make any sense to save, because over a course of time, your currency is being destroyed. Keynes was very comfortable with that, because as a part of the moneyed elite, what you would do with your money is put it into real businesses. What you would put it into is real estate. What you would put it into is fine art. Things that, in spite of an implosion in paper, worthless script, has the ability to rise with the tide of inflation. So you've got the entire middle class that is subject to, and the lower class for that matter, which is subject to an inflation, and the upper class, which is largely insulated because they can buy real things. Now, the travesty is that our money system used to be oriented to a real thing, namely gold, and that put real things in control of the common man. Now, the common man doesn't even know what a Krugerrand, a 1-ounce maple leaf, they've never even seen a 1-ounce gold coin, wouldn't know why it's even relevant. But in a system of inflation, they pay the price, while, according to Keynes, it's okay. Everyone else at the top does better and better over a course of time. Well, I've explained storm number 1 with the easy money game, and ultimately inflation being the consequence. The second storm is the derivative death trap. And looking at what a derivative is conceptually, roll forward to how derivatives are impacting the market today. We're seeing financial carnage that is unequaled, unparalleled in all of U.S. financial history. Your major household names, Lehman Brothers, Merrill Lynch, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, are getting crunched. How is it that they're getting crunched? Well, they took their risk related to real estate assets and spread them around all over the world into hundreds of thousands of portfolios, and assumed that by spreading it around they could continue to take on more risk and just continue to spread it around. Why would they do that? Well, if I can collect a fee for creating a securitized product, if I can collect a fee for creating a paper asset and distributing it, and I can create more and more of those financial paper products and collect fees, then guess what that does to my bottom line? Guess what that does to my profits? Lo and behold, hundreds of billions of dollars later, Wall Street has had an epic decade, an epic decade. Well, what we're dealing with is mortgage-backed securities. What we're dealing with is homes, your home, my home, mortgages packaged, bundled together in what they would call securitized products. Instead of one mortgage sitting on the balance sheet with a local banker, where, you know, the old days of lending, he would sit down and say, I like you, I trust you, I've known your family for a long time, I see that you've held down a good job for 5, 10 years now, and I'm willing to extend you any amount of credit you need to build a house. Those days are over. That was an earlier generation, an earlier kind of banking. Today, you take that loan, you bundle it with 50 others, you let Lehman Brothers package it together and sell it off in tranches to 5 different pension funds around the globe. The assumption is that there's only going to be so many defaults that occur. There's only going to be so many people who, even though they got the loan, they couldn't make the payments, and they're ultimately going to default or foreclose on their home and lose that home. So they've already assumed that, say, 3-4% are going to not make payments and lose their homes. The problem is now it's 5 and 10 and 15 and 20%, 1 in 11 currently, of mortgages across America are either in default or late to pay. 1 in 11. Close to 10% nationally. That blows the socks off of all their expectations. So you've got defaults in the mortgage-backed securities market, and again, that risk is beginning to roll back uphill as you've got little mortgage companies going broke, as you've got little brokerage firms going broke. Ultimately, it rolls back up to a Bear Stearns, you know, who had $400 million of this in one particular account. They had a hedge fund. This goes back a couple years ago, midsummer. $400 million in bad real estate loans. Got ahead of themselves. They had to close those funds. That was the first domino to fall, which ultimately caused Bear Stearns to collapse. Bear Stearns collapse ultimately caused Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to collapse. And I think what we find is that there's been too much trust extended, not enough verifying occurring. If you could fog a mirror, you could get a loan. And that's, I think, what plays well into a third financial storm, which is the creation of credit and our addiction to debt as a country. If these two storms coming together was not bad enough, you have a third problem, a third storm, which is in the mix as well, and that's our compulsive debt addiction. We are used to being able to buy anything we want on credit. Because the system of securitization, where that paper can be spread out and those debts can be passed on as an investment on the other side, in your penchant to spend too much, by the way, that begins to go away, and we begin to realize that credit is something that we have been addicted to. We've lived well beyond our means. Now, it's not just the average consumer that is over indebted. In fact, I think the average American is indebted to the tune of 132% of their income. They have that much more debt, 132% debt compared to the income that they generate. Which it's only been worse than that. One occasion in U.S. history, I think it was about 137% of income. Corporate America is the same way. Corporate America has financed their growth through debt. You look at a company like General Motors or Ford, and they've got 10 to 15 times the amount of debt as they do equity. You know, so $150 billion in debt for a $10 billion, $15 billion company. Now, the reason that works for Wall Street during a certain time is that as interest rates drop, their debt gets cheaper and cheaper. What happens with your own home? You know, you have a home mortgage at 10% and interest rates drop to 7%. You refinance, right? And that gives you greater capital to go spend and to go do something else with. Well, that's been the boon and the benefit to Wall Street for a long time. So you've got individuals benefiting from a debt addiction. You've got corporations benefiting from a debt addiction. You've got a government who is also benefiting from a debt addiction. It took us 240 years to accumulate $900 billion in debt. I'm sorry, $900 billion in debt. It's taken us the last 20 or 30 years to go from 900 billion to 9.6 trillion in debt. They've just raised the cap another trillion with the bailout of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and next year's expected liabilities. We're looking at $1 trillion deficit for the first time, 1 trillion in 1 year. Now that's conservative. I think you'll see $2 trillion as a budget deficit next year. Now, how do we get away with that? We issue more paper. We issue more IOUs. And as long as China and Japan and all of our foreign creditors are willing to give us money, we'll just say, well, we overspent, but that's okay. Here's an IOU slip. We'll make it up to you over time. We'll make it up to you over time. So our government is addicted to debt. Individuals are addicted to debt. And I mean, you're looking at credit cards. You're looking at the toys that they spend. You finance those. The home. Nobody owns a home anymore. Of course you have a home mortgage. Anything and everything you're connected to. Your cars. How many people own their cars for cash? How many people actually finance them? The vast majority finance them. Everything is financed. We're addicted to debt because we have a conception of the good life which is frail and false, which says that if you're not keeping up with the Joneses, you really have no worth. If you're not driving the latest vehicle, if you're not building the nicest new home, yeah, 2,500 square feet used to be the right size. Now it's 4,500. You have your McMansions or your 10,000 or 14,000 square foot homes. But this is the thing. We have a conception of the good life which drives us to spend more and more money, even if we don't have it. Even if we don't have it. That's the American consumer and consumptive habits being driven by easy access to credit and an addiction to credit. The fourth and final storm that is on the horizon is the death of the dollar. And just for some background on the dollar, we became the world's reserve currency in 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement. After World War I and World War II, everyone else was bombed out. They had no infrastructure. They had no capacity. We had the fortunate advantage of having the Atlantic on one side, the Pacific on the other, natural buffers to the war. So we had full manufacturing capability. And because of that, we were able to come to the table and say, we're the last man standing. We are the best and only option for everyone to relate their currencies in terms of relative value to ours. We are essentially the gold standard. Just as Great Britain had been the century before, we were in this era. So in 1944 forward, we've had that privilege. What does that mean to be the world's reserve currency status? It means that for everyone to buy oil, to buy any goods and services, those transactions are denominated in our currency, which means that every central bank around the world has to carry our deposits, whether they like our dollar or not, whether they like our inflationary monetary policies or not. They have to keep it there. I mean, the Saudis are a perfect case in point. They have to keep dollars on deposit because that's how we pay them for oil. Hugo Chavez the same way. Anyone around the globe who does business with us is paid in US dollars, which means they've got them on account. It gives us a captive audience. It gives us the ability to distribute capital. It gives us the ability to distribute debt. And it gives us the ability to start a recycling process, which is what we've been the beneficiary of here the last 10 to 15 years, where we buy cheap goods from Asia. Those goods are then consumed here in the United States. Dollars go over there so that they don't expand and explode the value of their currency upward. They buy what? They buy U.S. Treasuries, and they offset our debt. They are willing to subsidize our consumptive habits because it keeps the game going, keeps the flow of assets going. And what do they get as a beneficiary? They get the build-out of infrastructure. Now, this is why it's important and why holding the reserve currency status was such a boon to us. We developed into the #1 economic powerhouse as a result of being the world's reserve currency, as a result of being the industrial powerhouse post-World War II. We've just built the industrial powerhouses of tomorrow on Wall Street's back. Investors have said, we want greater returns. We want greater returns, so we want you to lower your cost of production. We want you to take that plant that was in Mexico and where that laborer was being paid $2 an hour, and we want you to take it to Malaysia or China where they're paid 25 cents an hour, 50 cents an hour, because that will add to our bottom line, our profitability, the potential dividend payment, et cetera, et cetera. We have asked for it as investors. We have asked for it as investors, and they've delivered. They've delivered. But what we have built is infrastructure in other places which has basically gutted our economy. Now you come through a downturn, now you come through a greater depression, if you will, and emerging on the other side in the 1930s was an economic powerhouse, was the mechanism built through World War I and in the midst of World War II that it ground us through. We had the ability to create wealth as we created televisions, as we created toaster ovens, as we created cars, as we created things that consumers wanted. Now, what happens when you've built sufficient infrastructure in the third world or in developing countries to where they don't need to send those goods over to you anymore, and instead they're consuming them themselves? Two things happen. One, you're now bidding, you the American consumer are bidding for those same goods, and the price goes up. You used to be able to buy a DVD real cheap, but now they're buying it, willing to buy it themselves and not ship it to you. So what you had is, as the equivalent of a subsidy to inflation, something that lowered the impression that inflation was not a reality. Inflation didn't exist because you continue to buy lots of these trinkets and toys and things like this. Now all of a sudden everything, not only a gallon of milk, not only a gallon of orange juice, not only a gallon of gas, not only a dozen eggs, a loaf of bread, those things of course are going up in value. But there's kind of an offset because you get to consume and buy other things that are that much cheaper. What if everything around you is going up and you're having to actually bid for the same goods that were previously dirt cheap? That's what we're on the cusp of, is seeing the developed world become our chief competitor, as we have given to them an incredible gift, building infrastructure that it took us 2 world wars to put in place. We did that for free on the basis of greed. Inflation, derivatives, debt, and the death of the dollar, these are not hypothetical. Inflation, we already see monetary expansion at over 20% in the top 20 countries around the world. So it's not just a US phenomenon. We've actually infected the world with bad ideas. And now every central bank around the world thinks that the best solution to economic problems is just printing more money. Derivatives, again, those have been spread through every entity. UBS in Switzerland, the French banks, it doesn't matter where they're at, derivatives have had their day and are having a major impact. Debt, we begin to see that unfold now as people need access to credit, as people are having a hard time paying their bills with an increase in the price of gas and other things. And where are they going? They're going to their home equity line of credit and finding that it's been called, it doesn't exist anymore. And last, the death of the dollar. How do all of these things come together? You have an American consumer that's less prepared, that is less thoughtful, that is less educated than at any other time in U.S. history. You have more trust that's been extended to the federal government. You have more trust that's been extended to our U.S. dollar currency. You have more trust that's been put into the banking system, the places that you put your money, whether it's money market funds, which are currently foundering, and banks, which you know, there's a reason why Warren Buffett just exited the insurance business for banks. He just exited the business of insuring banks and bank deposits. He's not an idiot. The effect that this has on the average guy making $52,000 a year with a couple grand in the bank, more debt than he knows what to do with, and not a lot of assets on the other side. He thinks he has assets because he has a car, actually 2 cars. He has an ATV, actually 2 ATVs. He has a home, but all of these things have been financed. He doesn't actually own them. He borrows them from the bank. He borrows the usage of those things, and he's experienced a certain level of freedom freedom because he thought that he was experiencing the good life. He's actually a slave. He's a total slave. Now, what that man does when he doesn't have access to credit is he has to look himself in the mirror and say, I'm not worth my things because my things are gone. My things are gone. The loans have been called. I couldn't make payment on the debt. I had to let the four-wheelers go because they were too expensive. It was an extra $300–400 a month that I couldn't afford. So I had to actually sell them for pennies on the dollar. Pennies on the dollar. And the cars, we cut back to one car, and I thought it was worth twice what I sold it for, but no one was willing to offer me anything else for it. So the $40,000 vehicle went for $14,000. And it's a tragedy because actually he owed more money. He owed more money than what he got. He owed more money than what he got. And the same thing is happening with real estate. You look at the potential for this gentleman to refinance his home, and he bought a $300,000 home, financed it, put 5% down, and lo and behold, we're now 10–15% below his original purchase price. He can't refinance it. He can't refinance it because he'd have to come to the table with the difference. He'd have to pay $15,000, $20,000, $30,000, $100,000 just for the privilege of refinancing. So what does he do? No, he doesn't keep the home. He hands the keys over to the banker. He says, I can't make payments. It didn't turn out the way I thought it would. I thought I would be able to keep my job. I thought I would be able to make payments on my toys and my cars and my home. And my life is upset because I overextended myself on the assumptions that the system would remain tomorrow exactly as it had yesterday and the day before. I've taken for granted that for 10, 15, 20 years, the world would do me a favor. And now everything seems to be working in reverse. And so the average man in the street says, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do, except walk away. Except walk away and acknowledge that it's worth zero. And I guess my hope is that the average American, one, does what they can to protect themselves now against that inevitable conclusion, because that will happen. You have the average American, which doesn't even know these things are happening. Shame on him. They need to get educated. You have the average American who is unprepared and ill-equipped to deal with them. You can do something about it now. You absolutely can. But a part of that process is taking ownership, taking responsibility for your family, yourself, and not waiting for the system that created the problem, the system that didn't recognize the problem to begin with, the system that is now trying to cause or cure the problem. This is the system that you're going to put trust in. Okay, great. I would suggest a different tack. I would suggest that you take personal responsibility. I would suggest that you educate yourself. I would suggest that you grasp for any resource possible to figure out what is happening in the world and what you can do about it. Politically, what you can do about it economically, what you can do about it financially, what you can do about it socially, what you can do about it as it relates specifically to your family, as it relates to yourself. I think it starts with honesty. I think it starts with integrity, an appraisal of the world as it is, an appraisal of yourself. Where are your weaknesses? Look at your own balance sheet. Where are my liabilities? Where are my assets? Where am I naked? Where are my risks? Do your risk analysis. There's not a lot of awareness as to what is happening in the world and what people can and should be doing about it. I think that if people are interested in helping their families, if they're interested in preserving value, if they're interested, frankly, in surviving what are very difficult times, now and even more so over the next 2 to 3 to 4 years, this is when you want to take out a pencil and start taking notes. Here's what you do. First, I would get as liquid as possible. Strive for maximum liquidity. If that's eliminating some debts, so be it. If that's selling off some useless assets, so be it. You need a cash cushion. Reduce debt as much as you can. Improve your balance sheet. So that's the second thing, is just remove as much debt from the equation as you possibly can. The third thing I would suggest is just keeping it simple. Whatever you're doing in your finances, don't make it complex. If it sounds complex, avoid it. If it sounds like there's too many bells and whistles and they all almost seem too good to be true, just remember simplicity is best. When it comes to investing, if you don't understand it, don't do it. If you don't understand it, don't do it. Warren Buffett had that phrase in mind when he avoided the tech boom and bust. Didn't understand it. It was beyond him, but he avoided the bust as well. The complex finance structures, the structured investment vehicles, the credit default swaps, the magical creations of Wall Street, which are whiz-bang slick, will just simply blow your mind. In complexity, yeah, if you don't understand it, don't do it. Number 4, ask yourself what's important to you. Get back to the basics. What really matters? What really matters? Number 6, don't let anyone do your thinking for you. This is really getting to the root of who you are as an individual. Your value is not in light of society. It's not in light of your stuff. Your value and your dignity it rests solely in you. Don't let someone else think for you. Authority, Wall Street, government, it doesn't matter who the authority is. It doesn't matter if they have a PhD. The average man on the street, common sense, trust me, it's good enough. My grandmother was a brilliant woman. Not college educated, not even high school educated, but a brilliant woman. She had what it took because she did her own thinking for her. That also meant that she invested in her own education. She stayed up on what was happening in the world. She was willing to look at whether it was the New York Times or USA Today or any host of papers and look at them critically. Realize that every writer has a point of view and is trying to convince you of something and is probably wrong. Number 7, I would seek to understand the times that we live in. That is, engage with current events critically and try to do that from a historical perspective. That means that you'll have to back up and look at earlier instances of this happening. I think Naomi Wolf's work was very good in this regard, looking back at history in order to understand our current, present political boondoggle. It really becomes clear that there's echoes throughout history, that there are similarities, there are rhymes, and lots of things that they aren't exactly alike, but they're similar, and we can learn from them. And if you understand the times that we live in today, then you can choose how to live in them wisely. You can choose how to protect your family. You can choose how to survive. Number 8, be flexible. Things are changing so fast. Don't plant your feet in the cement. I mean, you really have to look at the world and be willing to be wrong. The ideas that you've held, the worldview that you've held, reanalyze it. Look at your assumptions and question them. That's important. Be flexible. And there's certain ideas on Wall Street, whether it's that Keynesian economics always works. Well, that may or may not be the case. But you're going to have a hard time getting past that if you're not flexible, if you're not willing to say, well, what if? Let's just say in theory that there was a better idea. What would that look like? Engage with it in a hypothetical process and be flexible in all the things that you do and think about. Number 9, plan ahead, develop a strategy. This is a problem for most of our culture because we're so busy. We live moment by moment, from one crisis to the next, according to the tyranny of the urgent, and we don't really have a plan in play. We don't have a strategy, so develop a strategy. Number 10, develop a mindset of survival. This is actually quite common sense. I'm not talking about grabbing an AR-15 and a shovel and digging a foxhole in your backyard. But you look at a city like Los Angeles or New York or any major metropolis, and you've got limited supply lines coming into the city. Why not have a couple months' food on the shelves? Do you really, in the case that those supply lines are cut, whether it's geopolitical reasons or fuel strikes or whatever the case may be, is there a reason for you to stand in line with a bunch of angry, hungry people? No, no. So just common sense, develop a mindset of survival. There's certain parts of the country that do a good job of that. I mean, Southern California is great. You anticipate earthquakes, so it's common for people to think about having, a gallon of water and a space blanket in the back of their car. Lastly, number 11, no matter what the circumstances are, never give up. Never give up. We haven't experienced a lot of hardship in this country, not for a long, long time. And it can either bring the worst out of people or it can bring the best out of people. It can either cause them to turn in tooth and claw on each other, or it can cause them to turn to their neighbors and help and extend a different kind of generosity and a different kind of other-centeredness. And I think a part of never giving up is looking for the best in yourself and looking for the best in others in a very difficult circumstance, lest we become what many would deem us to be, just beasts. So let's be specific. We've talked about some general principles of survival. It's important to have, you have a choice to make. You have resources today. Let's say you have $5,000, $500,000, $5 million. It doesn't matter. The principle applies regardless of the same, and the specifics, I think, apply as well. Striving for maximum liquidity. That means a part of that should be in cash. Part of that should be in liquid form that you can pay bills with if necessary. Don't leave that just in the banking system. In case of a bank holiday, should you have some of that at home? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. If I were to choose 1 or 2 regular publications to look at, partially because you're going to be outside of the scope of the Ivy League and outside of the scope of the controlled media here in the United States, I would subscribe to the Financial Times if you're looking for a daily paper. I would subscribe to The Economist if you're looking for a weekly rag. These are intelligently written, dynamically written, for 100 years plus, and their news reporters are all over the world, and they're educated from all over the world. They're not in-the-box thinkers. And I think that's what you really need right now, is to tap resources that are outside of the box, not necessarily inside the box. If you're interested in what's happening from a political standpoint, I would look at stratfor.com, stratfor.com. Great international reporting on world events of a political nature, of a geostrategic nature. Very good. I think if someone wants to understand kind of what the establishment, quote unquote, is thinking and the direction of their politics, whether it's the neoconservative agenda or even a liberal agenda. I mean, it ends up being very interesting. The Republicans and Democrats are essentially on the same team, moving forward an agenda that's remarkably similar with different language. Go to the CFR website, Council on Foreign Relations. There you're dealing with the moneyed elite, you're dealing with the political elite, and what they're talking about, the issues that they consider the issues of our day, which from the top-down perspective, if you're not at the top, you ought to know what they're thinking and how you, the minion, factor in. So I would read the CFR's website just to kind of keep abreast of, yes, what's happening. They've got great reporting, but again, what's the spin? That spin is important. That spin is important to understand. I think it's important that Americans realize that we're maxed out, we're spent up, we've gone past the point of just an easy fix. Any solution at this point is going to be incredibly painful, and I'm not sure that a solution exists. What I'm afraid we're looking at is the end of an empire. And unfortunately, the two most violent periods for an empire are when it begins and when it ends. And the most desperate acts, both by citizens and leadership, are also at the beginning of an empire and at the end of an empire. And I see us moving that direction. From a financial standpoint, we are eroding and destroying the things that made capitalism and our system of capitalism great. We've debauched that and turned it into a system of crony capitalism, where essentially we have something just one notch to the left of Nazi Germany, of National Socialism and the fascist regime where big government and big business was married. So when you've gone that far, I don't know that there's an easy fix. I don't know that there's an easy fix at all. I think one of the things that I see as hopeful is that the system is failing. It's failing you. And the beauty is, this was never supposed to be about the system. This was supposed to be about you. Of the people, by the people, and for the people is about you. It's not about the system. So if the system fails, I'm not so sure that that's a bad thing.